Hi, how you doing and welcome back to another video on the channel. What we have for you today is our wildcard video going into game week 12, and as you can tell by the title, it's a little bit risky. This wildcard team is really designed for those players who maybe haven't had the start that they wanted in FPL and they kind of just want to go for it. It's now or never, and they feel like sort of giving up on the season. Well, there's another lifeline for you if you've still got your wildcard, and it is still 93% rated, which is a good percentage to have with the data backing you up. We are recording this before Sunday's games have kicked off, but if there's any injuries or major changes, I'll put in the comments as always. And I am actually thinking of considering using my own wildcard in the international break as well. So I'll probably put another video out in a few days just with an update of how I'm feeling towards that. But let's get into the team. And we're going to start in goal like we always do. And this week I'm going with Kepa from Bournemouth. Now, Bournemouth actually have great fixtures, and Kepa has only played in 6 out of 11 possible games so far, and that's because he wasn't transferred at the start of the season. And I think he got a little bit of an injury halfway through, but he is still ranked 16th in saves out of all goalkeepers, which for playing half the games is pretty good, to be honest. And he's managed to get 5 save points in those games as well, which pretty much says he's getting a save point every game he plays, which is a nice little bonus for when no goalkeepers are essentially keeping clean sheets anyway. He's also a massive differential, and the fixtures, as you can see, Brighton, Wolves and Ipswich in the next 4 are looking pretty good. I think if you weren't a fan of Kepa, you can swap him to pretty much any other 4.5-ish million midfielder. We talked about Sanchez last week from Chelsea, and he's still a great option, but I've got a triple Chelsea up in this team as well, so I couldn't really have Sanchez in as a 4th Chelsea player. On the bench, we've got Fabianski as a 4 million goalkeeper. He's just the best 4 million goalkeeper. He's the one who is at least most likely to play and has already played so far this season. So into defence is really where we're kind of knuckling down a bit with the cheap players. We always say recently, just go cheap in defence. If no one's keeping clean sheets, you might as well save your money and spend it elsewhere. And there's nobody here who's priced more than 4.7 million. So for me, I think we're going to highlight Levi Colwill here because he plays 90 minutes in every game. And I think if you're going to go for cheap defenders, you at least want them on the pitch. So he's nowhere near a booking suspension either. He's got 2 yellow cards, and Chelsea's fixtures do look amazing. Leicester, Southampton, Brentford, Everton, Fulham, Ipswich, Palace, Bournemouth and Wolves takes you up to the 20th of January. So you're not going to need to make any changes. We always say, you don't want to be using your free transfers on cheap defenders. A wildcard is what you use for when you want to rotate these sort of players around to take advantage of the fixtures. So you don't want to be in a few weeks thinking, I want to swap out one of my 4.5, 4.6 million defenders, because you want to use those transfers on players with higher upside. But seeing as you wildcarding, you might as well take advantage of all the transfers you can use and get in these cheaper defenders. So Aït-Nouri, Konsa and Mazraoui all fit into that category. They're all got good fixtures coming up, and you could play any of them when they're at home, and take advantage of those home fixtures. We all know about Wolves, but Villa's are pretty good as well up to game week 21, and Konsa plays 90 minutes as well. He's someone you don't have to worry about. Now, Mazraoui is a bit more of a risky pick, but he does have some attacking upside when he's on the pitch, and I think that could also fit in well with Amorim's system coming forwards. If he is that sort of right wing back, right midfielder position, it could really be kind of a revelation. The problem you've got is that it also might not be him. It could be Garnacho, it could be even Anthony, somebody like that. So we just have to wait and see in terms of how he's fitting in. But if he's someone that you think, I don't mind Mazraoui being on the bench for the next few game weeks just until we see, I think he's a good option if you just want to sort of stash him on the bench and not use a transfer to get him in later on if he does prove to be that guy. I also think that someone like Lewis Hall would be a good option here as well. Newcastle have West Ham, Palace, Brentford, Leicester and Ipswich in the next 6, and he's 4.3 million. So if you were looking to sort of, get a little bit extra cheaper and go for someone who's probably in more form and guaranteed in more minutes than Mazraoui, I think Lewis Hall is a really good pick. So into the midfield, and it's where it gets really interesting, and bear with me because it's quite easy to criticise some of these picks, but we're going to start with Bruno, who is actually rated 6th in expected goals and assists out of all midfielders, and that's before the Leicester game, this game week. So you're getting ahead of the curve, and you're also kind of banking on him being a bit more attacking in Almarin's system, which he probably will be. He's got that maybe new manager bounce, and he's still 10th in minutes played overall. He's going to be on the pitch, and he's got penalties in him as well. And Man United are that sort of team where when a new manager comes in, they do seem to get penalties more often than not. So that is a factor here. And he is a good price point, 8.3 million. Might be awkward for some managers to fit in, but if you're looking at replacing maybe, someone who's a 10 million player, maybe a Son or maybe even a Saka, depending on how you're looking at your team, you're saving 1.5, 2 million there as well, which you could invest in balancing out the rest of the midfield, which we've done by getting in Odegaard. Now, he might look out of place, but he is back around the squad, and he will have another 2 weeks to get ready now with the international break. He's kind of on the bench and he's kind of ready to play, not quite fully fit, but with 2 more weeks of sort of not having the pressure to be in the squad and impact Arsenal's games, I think that could really make a big difference in his preparation. And everyone says how Arsenal's attack is missing him, and I think if that's truly the case, then why not go for him? He is 2 million cheaper than Saka, and I probably wouldn't get him on a free transfer now, but I think if you wildcard in, that's like almost like a free hit sort of thing where you can get him in and you can just transfer him out in a few game weeks if it's not what you were hoping for. But I think as he is that link between defence and attack, we know how creative he can be, and I do think the upside is there. But, there is a ton of other players that you could go for if you didn't want someone like Odegaard. This is the team for a bit more of a risk taker, someone who is looking to get those differential players in early. Now, who aren't differential players is Salah and Palmer, and they don't need much introduction really. We're not going to spend ages talking on them, but they are the sort of bread and butter points winners in this team. You think if Bruno and Odegaard are missing out, well, you've kind of got those baseline points coming in from Salah and Palmer anyway, or you at least hope. They both have good fixtures, and they're both players who you think are going to be able to, score consistently. So Semenyo is a good first bench option, and I think it's important here if Odegaard doesn't come back as quickly as we're hoping for from this point. He also has a nice run of games with Wolves, Ipswich and West Ham in the next 5, which should cover that Odegaard pick if you were a bit cautious of him not playing, and a bit like we said with Mazraoui, you want to get him in early and just get him on the bench, and Semenyo can cover in that meantime. So up front, I'm sticking with Watkins. I really rate him. I'm a big Watkins fan, and I think, maybe that's a bit of bias as well, but I just look at the fixtures and I look at his underlying stats, and he's still averaging 5 points per game, and he's third in expected goals and assists from all strikers. He's got a really good run of games, Crystal Palace and Brentford at home and Southampton at home as well. 3 out of the next 4 fixtures are at home. That Chelsea away game is not ideal, but still, Chelsea's defence aren't world beaters, and he still can, make advantage of those underlying stats moving forward. And I think he's a good price point as well. Maybe you wanted to sell him, to get in a cheaper striker and upgrade someone like Odegaard. But he's also the closest thing to Haaland in terms of price. And we do talk about it in a second, but a weak point from this team is that it's not the easiest thing to get Haaland back in without sacrificing a lot of value elsewhere in the team. But Watkins at 9 million does get you that closest gap to that 15 million-ish price that you would want for Haaland. Now, Matthias Cunha is a brilliant option. I've actually got Strand Larsen in my own team, and that's because I couldn't afford Cunha. But if you look at the stats going forward, Cunha's creativity and the way he makes things happen for Wolves is statistically miles ahead of any other striker, which just means he's involved in all the attacks so much. I think if you can afford it, he's definitely worth the extra money over someone like Strand Larsen. And he's guaranteed that those 90 minutes as well. He's just such a big part of how Wolves plays. And Nicholas Jackson, I think, continues to be super underrated. Chelsea's fixtures we've spoken about, he is someone who, in all the rotation madness that we think Chelsea might have, even though they're more settled this season than usual, Jackson is just guaranteed to start up front. And he's someone who is going to be on the end of all the Chelsea attacks, and someone who I think with the fixtures coming up could be a really great option. He's not quite that 6.5 million striker, so he gets overlooked a little bit, and he's not, your Isaks, your Watkins, your Haalands sort of price point, so he's not quite on the sort of viewed as a premium striker. But for me, I think he's just a brilliant option for this next run of games, and that guaranteed starts is really important over the Christmas fixtures. So the team rating is 93%. So even though you might think, oh, the defence is a little bit iffy, and you've got Odegaard and Bruno in there, I'm not sure about that, the data still backs it up. 93%, we say, it's not 100%, but if anything in the mid to low 90s is good. We know that there's so many variables in FPL and in the Premier League that you can't take account for. So as long as the data is in that ballpark, I think you've got the right sort of aim and basis to your team. And it's all about taking risks and, going your own way as well, and picking the players that you think are going to score in the future. We can all look back in the past and say, oh, well, I think this player is going to score well because they've just scored a hat-trick. That doesn't necessarily happen again. The real skill or point of Fantasy League is getting in the players before they score a hat-trick, before they score the points. So I think we've done that as well. We've got a good balance of players in form and a good balance of players who could score well in the future. And the team value is 100.1 million, and that is from scratch as well. That's if you were getting all these players in without owning any of them. So the whole point of this team is for those FPL managers who have maybe not got the start they want. And if you've not got the start you want, your team value is probably not as good as it could be either. So hopefully there is a lot of managers out there who can still afford this team, and we have talked about little areas in which you can save money as well. So for me, the strengths are, it's quite a well-balanced team with a decent bench. We've got a good bench there. You've got at least 2 players that you would not hesitate to come in, which is good for those players in our starting 11 at the moment who we think are maybe not going to start straight away, maybe need a bit more time to sort of embed. And we've got those Man United players in who don't quite know how they're going to play. And as we said, it is a very affordable squad that you can have for pretty much anyone in FPL who's still playing. So the weaknesses for me is maybe there's too many risks. I'm not blindsided by getting in players like Odegaard and maybe even Bruno. I'm aware that it might not work out, but the whole point is that you want to take those risks. And we do have players like Semenyo, Aït-Nouri, that can come in and cover for those players in the meantime. So whilst it is a risky team, I'd like to think we're aware of that and we're trying to counteract those risks. And there's also no Man City. Now, it is really difficult to sort of get Haaland back in once you've sold him, because it would mean sacrificing 2 good players. You'd have to sacrifice one of your strikers who you think is really promising, and you'd probably also have to sacrifice a good midfielder as well. Maybe that's not a problem for most people, but in this team, you wouldn't be able to sell Odegaard or Bruno and then upgrade a striker to get in Haaland. You'd have to sell Salah or Palmer, or have, a few more little transfers. Maybe you sell Bruno and Odegaard and then you upgrade Haaland. So it's not the easiest thing to get him back in, but it is possible, and it's something you just need to be aware of if you have sold Haaland, is what if he does go off and score a hat-trick again? Are you going to want him in? Well, if that's the case, how are you going to do that? And just sort of look at the price points of your players and just plan those possible moves and how many free transfers it's going to take to get him in. If you decide you're going to want him in, you might not want him in for the rest of the season. You might like your team value as it is. So yeah, this is our wildcard team. Let us know what you think. Are there any players that are missing? Anything you disagree with, or anyone you think you shouldn't be in? It's really good to hear your transfer thoughts as well. If you've got any transfer questions, pop them in the comments as well. Thank you very much for listening. Please do subscribe to the channel. Closing in on 250 subscribers. So if you can help with that and you're still listening at this point, you might as well subscribe as well. It is really appreciated. So thank you very much for listening again, and I will see you in the next one.